Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 96. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the acclaimed and inspirational author, Ginny Sassaman. Ginny, thanks for joining us.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Totally.
Yeah. Thank you. And so we, just doing some research, looking at, you have basically an amazing book that you published last year. It was like around last July or so, correct?
Yes, I think the book launch was like 1 year ago today.
Right. I might have been just about 1 year old. Yeah, July 29th, I think. So happy birthday, huh? Happy anniversary. Happy book birthday.
With me.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And you said, so, I mean, so, doing, just looking at it a bit and everything like this is like, so your book itself basically is, it's preaching happiness, creating a just and joyful world.
Yes.
And you have quite a story based off of how you got about writing this. And this is basically, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a book that's been in your head. You've been wanting to write since, way back in the early, 2000, I think it's 2011 or 2012, if I remember.
Probably. Yeah. It's been floating around in one format or another for quite a while.
Right. And you kind of got started with and you'll be able to talk to us a bit about this. Well, innovative to most, but for those that study it, know about it, about the whole gross national happiness perspective. So do you want to kind of give people a bit of a background about, who you are and how you sat down and started writing this book?
Gosh, that's a big question. I've had a variety of careers, but I think that who I am, I have always really been interested in and passionate about and active in social justice causes. And really my whole life, including as a child, really wanting to make the world a better place, really wanting to make the world a more fair place. At the same time, I have always been a writer. So I've done a lot of, I've marched in the streets quite a bit. I've been an artist. I've worked for nonprofit groups. I lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for a good number of years. And I worked especially for the group Common Cause, which was a tremendous experience, a wonderful experience. But I think at heart, I'm a writer. Well, I'll say a creator, because I am also an artist. I just like to create. But I think words are my strongest tool. I think both in writing and I can sometimes do a pretty good job from the pulpit or other places in communicating ideas orally as well.
Right.
So I was in DC. Then I was a full-time artist for about 13 years. Then that didn't seem to have enough meaning for me anymore. And I ended up going to the sadly defunct Woodbury College in Montpelier to get a master's in mediation and applied conflict studies.
Okay.
But as soon as I finished my master's, I picked up a book called Stumbling on Happiness, which really describes my life from that point on. So I stumbled on happiness, and happiness became my calling. Shortly thereafter, I picked up another book called The Geography of Bliss. The Geography of Bliss is an amazing book, nonfiction. These are both nonfiction. And the book describes the countries that are, according to various data sources, rank as the happiest countries in the world. And one of those countries was Bhutan. And I was reading the book and read for the first time about this concept of gross national happiness. And it hit me like a lightning bolt. I thought this totally makes sense. Again, given, my activism and my social justice concerns and my concerns about the environment, my concerns about income inequality and how I felt like the drive for more and more money seemed to be like ruining the healthcare system and ruining the educational system and all these things. And here is gross national happiness as an alternative. For those who don't know, the idea behind gross national happiness is it's a much more holistic and expansive way of measuring and encouraging success for systems like any government or a business. But you can also use it as a personal tool and how we think about measuring success and well-being in our own lives. And I think it's a huge, huge problem in our country and many others that we collectively define success in more monetary and materialistic terms. So you'll hear on the radio all the time, the GDP is up, the GDP is down. But you know what? If you really examine that, that tells you nothing about how well the people are doing or how well the environment is doing. It means nothing. All the GDP measures is the exchange of goods and services. And, the GDP undoubtedly got a huge boost out of Jeff Bezos going up into space. But I'm not sure how that contributed to the well-being of everybody else. It's just a false measure.
Right.
So the gross national happiness measurement and system says, what is it that really creates the optimal systems for well-being for as many people as possible, and the animals and future generations? No government can make people happy or should, but it's creating the systems that support that. So if you think about it in terms of your own personal life, you might have a measure that you use every day. Like I do a pedometer, 10,000 steps. So that's very concrete and it's kind of fun. But that doesn't tell me, did I get enough sleep? Am I eating well? How are my relationships? Am I spending enough time in nature? I mean, there are many, many different things which contribute to an individual's genuine well-being. And similarly, there are many, many different things that contribute to a collective system's well-being. So I got super excited about Gross National Happiness and ended up being one of the co-founders of Gross National Happiness USA. And am now on I'm a past president and I'm now on the advisory board. But then I also started studying personal happiness. And, it just became my life's work to teach people about these options, that we can change the way governments measure success, and which will therefore change how we behave as governments. We can change how we as individuals measure success so that we can live really much happier lives. And I'll just say one other quick thing, because I know I can just go on and on and on, talk. And I already forgot what I was going to say. I know. People think that in rough times in particular, which we're in, that it's really selfish to focus on your own happiness and your own well-being. I mean, like, how can I worry about my happiness, when these fires are burning out of control and COVID numbers are going back up and et cetera, all the bad stuff. But the truth is that the more we cultivate our overall well-being, our happiness, we become more thriving individuals. We are much better able to do whatever the work is that we are trying to do. whether it's raising children or, trying to stop a pipeline, whatever it is, when we can come from a place of the greatest positivity within ourselves, we have the tools.
Right.
We do a much better job of helping the rest of the world. So that is really why I care about happiness. I care about happiness. I mean, it's nice. I like to be as happy as possible, but I care about happiness because I think it's the best tool we have to save our planet,
right,
and create a better world for our children.
And you, as you mentioned, it's like, you're talking about like the GDP as compared as it is like, do you have, do you see this when people ask you about gross national happiness, where the GDP could say, well, that's kind of, that's kind of like objective, where happiness is subjective. How would you measure happiness? What would you say to something like that?
That's a really great question. And because I think that one reason the GDP is so popular, it was never meant to serve this purpose.
Right.
The person who kind of created it never meant it as an overall well-being measurement. That's not what it's for, but it's easy to measure. It's easy to measure. And so it's like, well, the GDP's up. That must be good, right? 10,000 steps, that I can measure.
Yeah.
That's easier to measure than what is the quality of my relationships with other people.
Right.
But you know what? There's been an awful lot of work done on subjective measurements of well-being, and they hold up to scrutiny.
Right.
They hold up to scrutiny. And as a result of, at the very least, of all of these different measurements of subjective well-being, we really know what it is that systems can do to support greater well-being of the people.
Right.
It's not a mystery.
Right.
So one of the things that's shown up in a lot of measurements in the United States, but not just the United States, pandemic of loneliness. It's a lot of loneliness, including in Vermont. It's a lot of loneliness. And a lot of loneliness in Britain. And Britain responded to this loneliness by creating a ministry of loneliness.
Oh, wow.
To help, come up with programs and systems to help people, because loneliness is terrible for people's health.
Right.
If you want to go back to dollars and cents, it puts a strain on the economy when people are lonely.
Right.
So we don't need to have objective measures. Subjective works well as well.
Right. And that reminds me too, it's like, talking to a disability advocate, they say the only disability is loneliness is the only disability. So.
Yeah. And there's so much of it. It's very sad.
Yeah. And so do you have, one thing, as, time stamping this conversation is like where we're at now with, in the midst of the pandemic with vaccines rolling out. And, someone was talking to me about the fact that, thinking about the pandemic as a slow moving hurricane that has come through, and the resulting destruction left behind is in the wake is a mental health crisis, because we've all been in the shared trauma. Is there some sort of optimism that now that it's that happiness in people's own, mental health seems to be on the forefront of a stage that has never really seen this level of what's the word, of scrutiny or advocacy for happiness, now that you're seeing it on this side of things?
Yes, well, I'm always optimistic, or almost always optimistic. But I honestly, Barney, I hadn't thought of it in the terms the way you're describing right now. But I do think it's true. I do think the moment is ripe to advocate for ways for us to be happier individually and collectively. And I think the pandemic showed us some of those things.
Right.
I think the pandemic certainly highlighted the value of relationships. and overall health and education. I think that from the pandemic, people learned a lot about kindness and being good to one another, which is definitely one of my favorite happiness tools. You know, when you are kind to other people, you also feel better.
Right.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Kindness is just wonderful. You know, a lot of these are like soft values or soft qualities that don't always get the attention they should in like mainstream media, which is going to focus on things like, oh, the infrastructure bill passed today, or people won the gold medal, or, you know, not the soft things, which really are the biggest parts of our day-to-day lives. And so I do think the pandemic shined a light on that, on the importance of love, on the importance of kindness and caring and gratitude.
It reminds me about like that. What you're talking about too reminds me of that fame was that Mr. Rogers quote where he said, "When you see something scary in the news, look for the helpers." Yeah, yeah.
You know, Fred Rogers, he was a saint.
Yeah, he was good.
Honestly, he was an embodiment of someone living really a good, happy life for himself and others.
Right. And how do you recommend too, because you were talking in a previous interview, you're talking about that there's almost to a point where you have to balance, in order to be happy, you have to compare it to being sad, right? Is that part of the things that you're talking about too? Is like, in order to experience happiness, you have to, because I thought you're talking about it in your book one time, like last year when you said that.
Yes. Yeah. And not that you have to balance.
You don't have to be. No,
definitely not.
Right.
But living a life that is as thriving, and here's how I define happiness. Actually, I define happiness as a greater sense of peacefulness and inner contentment, as well as thriving and a much greater propensity for positive emotions. But that doesn't mean there won't be plenty of negative emotions too. Right. It's not about being in denial.
Right.
That's a recipe for disaster. You know, pretending to be happy when you're not.
Right.
So sadness is absolutely a part of life, and loss, and anger. You know, these are all part of the human experience. But it's been my experience that having cultivated these happiness skills in myself as much as possible, and I can talk about how I do that, but it helps me bounce back faster.
Right.
It helps me see the good in the harder situations. You know, it also paradoxically gives me freedom. It gives me freedom to grieve. It gives me freedom to cry. It gives me freedom to be angry, because I know I won't stay there. I know I can feel all the feels, and, you know, and then I'll feel sunnier again.
Right.
And then I'll feel sad again. But, you know, it's not, you don't ever get there and stay there forever. It's up and down.
And so you said you recommend to the people that, you know, that read the book as well, is like you to practice happiness, like as a skill.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's really like a muscle. Actually, here's one of my favorite things. So this is brain science. And it's really, I just love this. And that is this whole concept of neuroplasticity in our brains. It used to be believed that we kind of created all the patterns in our brains when we were very young, I think like 3 years old. But more recently, it's been realize that that's not true. We continue to create new neural pathways in our brain, like right up till we die.
Yeah.
So when we persistently and carefully and thoughtfully focus more on the positive, we are wiring our own brains to be happier brains.
Huh. Okay.
When we wallow in the negative, and again, I mean, I'm all for a good wallow every once in a while. Just don't stay there too long. We're then also wiring our brains to be more negative. And so what that means is, in practical terms, in any given situation, you can see the positive and experience and feel the positive, right, or you can see and experience and feel the negative. And when our brains are more wired to be negative, that's where we're going to go.
Right.
Naturally. But when our brains are more wired for the positive, we're going to go to the positive more readily. So an example that I talk about in the book, which continues to be a real live example in my life. So a few years ago, I got a diagnosis in my left eye of something called retinal neovascularization, which means bleeding in the retina, which is bad.
Yeah.
It's very bad. And it was a shock to get this diagnosis. And what that means is, without treatment, the eye doctor told me I could lose total sight in my left eye in a matter of months.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a surprise. And here's what the treatment is. Every 6 to 8 weeks, I have to go to the retinal specialist and get a needle stuck in my eye.
Oh, wow. With
a treatment. So when I initially got that diagnosis, I was up in Burlington, and it was about an hour's drive home to where I live outside of Montpelier. It was a gorgeous summer day in June, beautiful. And I kept trying to focus on positive. I was like trying to look at the beauty, and I was like, no, this is not going to work. This is not going to work today. This is really scary and upsetting. And so I spent a couple of days being definitely scared, right, and upset. But my happiness knowledge helped me right away, because I also know we humans, we have sort of a natural level of our happiness. When good things happen, our happiness goes way up. And when bad things happen, it goes way down. But then it kind of comes back. And I know that even the actor Christopher Reeve, who became a quadriplegic, was a happy man. Not immediately, but after a period of adjustment. So I walked around practicing being blind and saying to myself, I'll be happy. I'll be happy. I'll get there. Yeah. So it did all work out. But what also happened was I have a blog, and I wrote about this on my blog. And I just got an outpouring of love and support from so many different friends. And also this medicine, it's very expensive. There's only 4 retinal specialists in the whole state of Vermont. His services are very expensive. So, but I had health insurance. So, and it was caught in time. Right. I did have some eye loss, some vision loss. So I was able pretty quickly, within a matter of a few days, to find all this meaning in the experience. I mean, I was really touched by the love and felt enormous gratitude. So cultivating happiness allows us to get back to those sunnier days, not to ignore it. I'm not ignoring it.
Right.
I see this doctor very frequently, but and I may yet lose the vision in that eye. I don't know,
Right.
but nonetheless, I could still be a happy person.
Right. Yeah. Wow. And do you talk about it also too about that is gratitude part of happiness a skill set, or is that
Absolutely
mutually? Okay. All right.
yes, gratitude. Gratitude is perhaps the best. Gratitude and kindness are two of the best things that people can do to rewire their brains and increase their own levels of happiness. So I have various happiness practices that I do on a daily basis. And I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. I used to write down more, but then I learned, so there's always more to learn. I learned that it's important in this rewiring of the brain to take some time. So instead of saying, I'm grateful for blueberries, say, I might say, I'm really grateful that we've had enough rain and enough sun this year to really grow a good blueberry harvest, to rewire that brain and really, kind of ponder it and let it sink in. Kindness, having a very intentional kindness practice is really good. There in the book, actually, there are many different ways to practice happiness, because we're all unique individuals, and different practices will appeal to different people. But it is great to do it on a regular basis, just like you might go to the gym on a regular basis or practice yoga on a regular basis. I am old enough to know that when I stop practicing yoga, my body just, poof, I feel it right away. I have to get, so
Okay.
it's good to keep doing it.
So let's talk a bit about, your author hat for a second, because we have a lot of like authors that that watch or listen, and some people that are budding authors and stuff. So to give us a little bit of of how it went for you to decide specifically on, because you could have written any types of books that that could have been about this. Is like, how did it work for you to hone in on specifically this book, and how was the writing process for you?
Yeah. So it was kind of a 2-track thing.
Okay.
Yes, I was very interested in writing a book. At the same time, in 2013, I was first asked by the church that I go to, the Unitarian Church of Montpelier, if I wanted to be a guest preacher one day and preach about happiness. And I said, why, yes, because I can preach about this all the yes. And one thing led to another, and I have ended up giving many sermons at different churches, largely in Vermont, but not entirely in Vermont, on various aspects of happiness and well-being, both individual and collective. So that was going on. And then at some point I realized that I had a unique story to tell, a unique niche in the happiness book canon,
Right.
because I came into the personal happiness world through the systems door. There's only 4 of us who can say we were co-founders of Gross National Happiness USA. So there's only 4 of us who have that piece of the story. Then this hasn't come up yet, but I did try for a while as part of how can I best get this message out there. I did for about a year and a half or so, have a store, the Happiness Paradigm Store and Experience, which was wonderful, but not very financially successful. So I had that experience, and as well as, I'd gotten a certificate in positive psychology. So there is, in the happiness world, there's kind of the systems happiness movement on the one hand. And on the other hand, there's the personal happiness movement, and they don't actually overlap very much. I think they're starting to more, right, but they didn't. And I felt like I was one of the few people kind of standing in both places. So I realized I had a story to tell, and I started one book, and got pretty far into it and took it to a friend who is an editor. And she said, the good news is you're a phenomenal writer. The bad news is, you're writing about policy and you can't do that. You're not a policy wonk. I'm not. And you're writing about research and you're not an academic. And she said, you have to tell more stories. Tell more stories. Tell more stories. Yeah. So I tried to rewrite. That set me back. Honestly, for those of you listening and watching who are authors, that set me back because I liked what I was doing. Actually, I liked the book I was writing, but I had reason. I really esteemed my friend's opinion. She knew what she was talking about. So it just totally set me back. But eventually I tried it, writing more stories. But really, I couldn't let go of the policy or the research because that's all really important to me. So I took it back to my friend again, and again got shut down. And that time I was crying, and it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. So while that was happening, meanwhile, there is a church near Silver Lake State Park in Vermont that is a summer-only UU church, and they don't have their own minister. So they asked me one year to do 4 different services. And I said, wait, you do know I'm not really a minister, right? And they said, yes, but we want you. So I did 4 services. The next year, they asked me to do 7 out of their 8 services that summer. Mm-hmm. And it was halfway through that second summer that I said, oh, this is it. This is it. This is my book. Right. And which then changed the process of writing the sermon somewhat, thinking that it wasn't, my audience wasn't going to be just the people sitting in front of me, but that it might be readers as well. And then they asked me back to do another 5 the next summer. So then I took it. I just went to one publisher because I know the people at Rootstock, and I went to them, and they said yes, they would like to publish the book. But then I had another. It got interesting after that, again for the writers in the room. So I was assigned an editor. Now I have spent my life writing. And often writing, like writing press releases at Common Cause that, my words got edited by this vice president, and I was used to having my writing completely rewritten by other people, and I was comfortable with that. But this was different. Different because these were my thoughts and my words, and I wasn't writing them for an organization. This was mine. Right. And so, but I knew. I was like, I know, writers got to have an editor. Well, oh my gosh, I love my editor so much. Amabel Siorglas. I always have trouble pronouncing her last name. Amabel was great. I was so tentative and so nervous about working with her, but it turned out that I I thought I could just take the sermons and slap them in the book and there you would have it.
Right.
But that really wasn't true. You know, what I could say in 20 minutes in a book, you know, Amabel would ask questions and I would need to flesh things out. I would need to answer her questions. So all the sermons in the book, they're actually longer than the ones which I delivered. And also, delivering a sermon orally, I can cite anybody I want to cite, which I always do. I mean, I always give credit where credit is due.
Right.
But then when it came time to put it together, it was like, oh, well, wait, where did that quotation come from? And so a lot of work went into the end notes. And I like to tell people, I think the book is worth every penny just for the end notes. You know, if there's a topic you're interested in, like kindness, just look at the end notes and see the resources there. I mean, they're tremendous resources. But also, sermons allowed me to do what I really wanted to do, which was combine personal stories. So the book is full of personal stories because I think that's how people take in information best.
Right.
You know, they like stories. So it's full of personal stories, but it is also full of research to back up everything that I say. You know, it's not me saying we rewire our brains. You know, it's other people who have actually done that research and have standing to say that. And then there are, I also ultimately, bottom line for me, I want to inspire people to action. We're in trouble.
Right.
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I want people to act, but I also want people to have good lives and happy lives.
Yeah.
And they can. We can have good, happy, fun, joyful lives. And we can do our part, whatever it is, you know, whether it's fighting systemic racism, you know, or advocating for elephants. I mean, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to be done. And we can all do a better job of it, and we can all be happier. So I want to inspire people. And so, you know, the kind of the cool thing I realized with sermons, when I go and stand in a pulpit and it's time for the sermon, I better have something to say. Because, you know, everybody is looking at me like they want something. Yeah. Now, I mean, they might not know what they want, but they might want to learn something. I mean, there's a reason that people come to church. They might want to learn something. They might want to be comforted. They might want to be inspired. They might want to feel a sense of belonging. They might want to be moved to tears, but they want something. As opposed to life in general, I think people don't like being preached at. You know, we don't really like that. But this is an exception to that rule. People don't like being preached at, except when that's exactly
what they came for. Yeah.
So a book, you know, I had friends who wanted me to come up with a title that was less preachy sounding, which I understand. Yeah. I understand. This is very secular. This is very non-dogmatic. Right. But it is preaching. Right. It is preaching. So.
And so you would recommend, though, for educators to be off. At what point do you recommend pulling in an editor, whether it be like a line editor or a copy editor, to come into, like, when the book is finished, or do you say, like, a few chapters in? Do you say, hey, what would you be your recommendation?
Gosh, I think that depends on the writer and the book. Right. You know, I have a friend who's been working on a book of short stories, and he has not been a writer his whole life.
Right.
So he has brought in editing help all along the way.
Right.
To help him be a better writer, help him learn how to craft short stories, and help him learn how to do it. And so people might want editing early on in the process for a comfort stage. Certainly, I mean, I don't know what would have happened with my first iteration of the book if I had just kept going without my friend's advice. Maybe that would have worked. Maybe not. I don't know. In the case of this book, I think it really was best to have an editor come in at the end after it was all written. Well, it was mostly all written. I did actually still have a couple of sermons to add at the end, because that gave the overall picture of the whole book. Like one of the questions I had in going to the editor was, should I change the order? I mean, what order should these sermons be in? Well, you wouldn't. How could you answer a question like that if you didn't have all the pieces?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful. I think it depends.
Right. And do you?
But I will say, thank God for an editor. And I'll tell one other story. A friend of my daughter's published a book a few years ago. It's a fantastic, amazing book based on her experience as a nurse midwife in the Congo, working for Doctors Without Borders. But as I understand the story, so this book was based on emails she wrote all through the process. And so she came back and she had a publisher, a major publisher that was interested in her, but wanted to assign an editor to her. She didn't want that. She didn't want an editor, so she self-published. Yeah. And as I say, it is an amazing book, but it is repetitive. And it could have been so much better. And not only that, she could have had this great deal with the publisher.
Right. Yeah.
And I say to writers, find an editor who you trust and who is good and who gets you and who gets your work. And Amma Bell made it a much better book.
Right. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
And do you have any? Is there a sequel to this in the works at all? Because you must have more stories that you had to cut out, or stories that you thought of after the book was published.
I do have more stories. I'm amazed at how many stories. There's lots of stories. I have two different ideas of where I could go with another book. One of them, I mean, I've really been wondering about the idea of a memoir, because I wonder, some people, as I said, there's so much work that needs to be done, and a lot of it is so hard. Right. It's such hard work. And I see people doing such hard work. And I get to make my job happiness. How did that happen? I'm kind of interested in that. But I'm not interested in writing it just as a vanity piece. I would only want to write it if there was value in it for readers as well. So I am thinking about that. And there are many, many, many stories which some of which I've been putting in the blogs, but I am interested in pulling together a different collection of stories that is not sermons, because again, sermons is great, but kind of limited me in certain ways. Right. But pulling together a collection of other pieces, you know what? Anyway, I can get this message out there.
Have you ever? Has there been any discussion, either with your friends or just like internal dialogue with yourself, to think about, maybe adjusting the audience a bit? Like, have you ever thought about doing like a children's book type size of something like this? Or
I haven't thought about a children's book. That's kind of interesting. In some of the services that I lead. Mm-hmm. I am asked to do a children's story. Right. only once did I write that story myself. I usually find a picture book. But those picture books are inspiring, and they show me that it can certainly be done
Right.
in a meaningful way. But, I haven't ever tried to write specifically for a young audience.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And do you, and so, because I thought I remember listening last year that you had some other book ideas too that you were working on as well.
I don't think so.
I thought you said something about like a book.
My very first book idea is long gone. So, and when I was getting my master's in mediation, I wrote my my capstone paper, which I think it was supposed to be like 25 pages, but mine was like 75 pages. Writing. And I wrote that on suffering.
Okay.
I really fell in love with the topic of suffering too. And I thought that could be a good book within the kind of the mediation and conflict resolution world. But that's too far in the past for me. I don't think I'll go back to that.
Okay.
And, I don't know. I think I have read Elizabeth Gilbert talking about creativity. I love Elizabeth Gilbert's wisdom on creativity, and would recommend her to any aspiring writer to, feel better about whatever it is that you're working on. But she talked about kind of anything that sparks your interest, just diving into it and seeing where it goes. So last week we were camping on Burton Island, and I was just thinking what a strange concept it is, especially for the people who work there.
Right.
Because when you camp on Burton Island, it's like you're living there for a couple of days, for a week. But it's this very kind of intimate community that is constantly changing.
Right.
Every day people come and people go, and there's your community. So it's sort of timeless and not changing, and it's also sort of constantly changing.
Right.
And for the first time in a long time, I had sort of a glimmer of, maybe I'd like to write a piece of fiction based on Burton Island.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Oh wow, that'd be fun. Yeah. And so, do you want to talk? Is your workshops? Are you still doing your workshops and wellness workshops?
Well, I stopped because of the pandemic.
Right.
I don't know if I will pick them back up or not.
Yeah.
It's almost still too early to tell.
Right.
I have, throughout the pandemic, in a way, I've continued to run my workshops because I have, at the beginning of the pandemic, in the very early months, like March or April,
right.
I think many of us wondered, what can I do to make it what can I do to help? So I began offering free guided meditation sessions on Saturday morning and Tuesday evening.
Oh, wow.
And a few months ago, I stopped the Saturday morning one, but I am still doing that on Tuesday night so doing a guided meditation free to anybody who wants to sign in. And if anybody, I see you have my blog page up there. I would be more than happy if anybody wants me to come, if they feel like their workplace needs it now more than ever, and if they're comfortable bringing people together. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I would love to come in and help people out that way.
Right. And so, we're at the top of the hour now, Ginny. So if people want to learn more and find your book, happinessparadigm.com, is that the best place to? to find everything, Ginny?
It could be happinessparadigm.com, or they could go to the publisher, which is Rootstock Publishing, and look for my book on the books page.
Okay.
Yeah, there it is, and click on that. The book is available. You could go to any independent bookstore in Vermont and order it. It's also on Amazon, but of course, I want to promote the independent bookstores.
That's right. Here you can get it, like you said, Rootstock Publishing, get it right here. Also the indiebound.org, you'll be able to get it.
Indiebound.org, or I know Bear Pond Books has it in Montpelier, and you could order it through any independent bookstore in the state. Right.
And also just to remark too, this is an award-winning book. You did win the Human Relations Indie Book Awards.
Yeah. I was very pleased about that. I think that's a great award to win. Yeah. It fits with what I'm trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Barney.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so thanks a lot, Ginny. This has been great. And congratulations on the award. Congratulations on your first anniversary of your publishing. So yeah, this is great. And come back, when you get on your second book, when your second book come out. So
well, I'm planning on taking a good chunk of the winter and going south without my family to write.
Okay. You don't like you don't like that. You don't like the snow then, huh?
No, I like it, but only to a certain point.
About 6 inches. That's as much as I can handle.
Or January is as much as I can handle. Yeah. So well, thank you. You're helping to inspire me. I think all writers, we sometimes need a little encouragement. So this has been helpful to me too.
You're welcome. And I gotta say, I do like the flowers behind you. Are those paper, or is that?
They are. I made them with my granddaughter for our Thanksgiving centerpiece last year.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Yeah. It was. And do you do a lot of like paper crafts or anything like that too, or?
I do. I've made paper, and I love making paper. It's so much fun. I really like it a lot. I like to create art that is just for fun, just to create it, and it feels good making it. And
it's good too. It's like
you never get, hung in the Metropolitan Museum of Art or anything like that.
And it's cool about like making paper. Do you recycle like old other things like?
Yes, that was a big part of it. The watercolor work that I used to do. So I used to make earrings, primarily pins and jewelry. But in order to make them durable, I would coat them with an epoxy polymer. And that stuff is not good for the environment, and probably not good for me either. But I loved making that jewelry, and I maybe still would, but I had to stop. Just my values. I had to stop working with this material, which I thought was so bad for the environment. So making paper was a way for me to do art in a more environmentally responsible way. Right. And I actually sponsored a workshop at the community center next door and had someone come in and show whoever wanted to show up that day, but show us all, how do we make paper out of paper which has been used for something else before. Right. And it's recycled. And then I would hang on to calendars and magazines and things with interesting pictures or words that I might then lay into the handmade paper. But yes, I love making it. And here's something else I love about it. It's very tactile. You know, you work with it. It's mushy. It's got the consistency of like oatmeal.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're rubbing your hands around in this very colorful oatmeal. A lot of fun.
Yeah. And what do you do with the colors? How do you get like the different colors?
The colors come from the paper that you use.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So, you know, I might get a brochure in the mail that has a lot of red in it. And I actually have different bins, and I will throw that into my red paper bin. Or, you know, I'll have something that has a lot of yellow, and that goes in the yellow bin. So then when I make the paper, if I want it to be yellow, I use paper that's already yellow that's been used for some other purpose.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
That's where it comes from.
We had I remember when I was in art school, we had to take the paper we used. We had to cook the paper, you know, like scrape it up, put it in the blender, and then we had like a screen, like, you know, like your screen, and then you kind of had to and swish it around like painting for gold a bit, and then
yes, I worked with a screen too to squeeze out all the water. That part too, very satisfying. Squeezing out the water.
It's good. Yeah, see, it's good. Yeah, like good tactile therapy, you know, like you
very
said.
much
It's
so.
good. Yeah.